today is the third and the final day of the Brynn Sewalong. Today, all we are doing are buttonholes and buttons, and I know that this is probably the most stressful part for most people, and so we are going to go ahead and dedicate an entire day, and we're going to show you lots of tips and tricks so you can get the best results. First, you're going to need to go ahead and grab your button and buttonhole guide, and you're also going to need your buttons. The pattern calls for 18L, which is like an 11/16 inch or 11.5 millimeters, just under a half an inch size buttons, but really anything between about 3/8 of an inch and a half an inch will work great. Now, when you see your button or buttonhole guide, make sure that you notice that there is a top indicated, and then you are going to want to go ahead and line that up on top of the right neckband. So the bottom of your guide should line up with the very bottom of the neckband. Now you can of course also do a left over right for your cardigan, but I'm going to do the traditionally female version, which is a right over left. But once again, you can just flop it if you prefer. Now go ahead and grab some kind of marking tool. I always use Crayola markers because they're really easy to wash out, and they come in tons of different colors, but use any marking tool that you prefer. And then you're going to go ahead and you are going to mark the top of each buttonhole, and then you can go back and mark the entire buttonhole if you want. I'm going to go ahead and do that for the purposes of this sew along, but often I honestly just mark the very top and then just sew straight down with each of my buttonholes. Now another thing to take note of is that the buttons are centered in those middle buttons, but the top and the bottom button are not centered on the buttonholes. This is not a mistake, this is intentional. This actually keeps the neckband locked in place when you're wearing it. So just keep that in mind when you see it. You might look at it and think, oh, that looks weird, but that actually is intentional. One little extra tip I wanted to just give here, if you are worried about sewing buttonholes on knit fabric, keep in mind that the fusible interfacing on the neckband will help, but if you want a little bit of extra strength, you can just grab a piece of tissue paper. This tissue paper is actually just cut from the outside of a pattern tissue, and you can place it under your neckband when you're sewing. I'm going to show you how to do it right here, and this is just going to give the feed dogs and the presser foot, essentially your machine, a little bit of something to grab onto if that knit fabric of yours is a little bit slippery, and you're just more likely to get consistent results with it. And then when you're done sewing that button or buttonhole, it is really easy to just tear away that tissue afterwards, and then you have a nice looking buttonhole. So go ahead and give that a try if you are struggling a little bit with sewing your buttonholes on your knit fabric. Okay, and once again here, I just wanted to kind of show you this one buttonhole that I put the tissue on. As you can see, it just kind of tears right off and really doesn't leave much of any kind of residue. Anything left over will just wash out, and it really does make a really nice and pretty buttonhole. Okay, so hopefully all of your buttonholes went okay, and now that they are all sewn up, I want to show you 3 different ways of finishing your button and buttonholes on your neckbands on the 3 different views of the Brynn that I sewed during the sew along. Now we are going to start with the burgundy view. This is the long sleeved cardigan, and we're going to do this one the more traditional way. So essentially we're going to open the buttonholes on the right band and attach the buttons on the left, and then it will just be buttoned up like normal. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open these buttonholes. Now you might want to use a buttonhole opener. I found that my buttonhole opener was a little bit wide for these buttonholes, so I'm actually just using my scissors to very carefully cut open each of my buttonholes. And now that those are all open, we're going to go over to our left neckband, and we are going to use that buttonhole guide to mark the button placement. Now note once again that the top and the bottom buttons are not centered in the buttonhole, and that this is intentional. So go ahead and mark the center of your buttons according to the buttonhole guide and also to your buttonholes that you just sewed, and do that on the left neckband. Next, we're going to go ahead and sew on those buttons. Now, I sew my buttons on my machine, and so to kind of help with that, I just use a glue stick, and that way I just kind of put a little dab of that glue stick, and then I put my buttons on top. I let that dry, and then that way I can use my sewing machine to sew them on without those buttons shifting around. But of course, you can just go ahead and sew them on by hand if that is what you prefer. And there you have it. This version of sewing on your buttons is completely done. So if this is the way that you are attaching your buttons, then you are finished with your Brynn. You can wear this one unbuttoned or buttoned, which is a really nice way to wear it. Now, if you always plan on wearing your top of your dress buttoned up and not unbuttoned as a cardigan, you might want to choose to sew through the buttons on through all layers of the neckband, and this just helps to secure that center front opening. So to do this, we're going to essentially skip opening those buttonholes, and then we'll sew those buttons through all layers in that area. Now, I like with my hip views to usually do this on the top 4 buttons, but then I sew the bottom 2 buttons on traditionally because I sometimes like to open those 2 when I'm wearing it. But this is complete preference. You can also, of course, sew through the buttons on all of the buttons. So go ahead and grab your button and buttonhole guide, and then you're going to line the right neckband up over the left neckband. So make sure that the very bottom edges line up perfectly. And then I'm going to actually use a glue stick, but you can also, of course, pin it. I'm going to use this glue stick to attach the right neckband over the left so it doesn't shift at all. But then those bottom 2 buttons that I'm going to do the traditional way, I will not use the glue stick on that part. Once again, like I said, you can pin this if you prefer. And then using that buttonhole guide, you're going to mark the button placement on the right neckband for the ones that you're going to be sewing through all layers, and then on the left neckband for the ones that you're going to be sewing traditionally. So once again, remember that that button placement on the top and the bottom buttons is a little bit different and not centered in the buttons when you are marking them. And then because I'm sewing these on my sewing machine, I'm going to go ahead and use my glue stick once again to kind of secure my buttons so they don't shift around when I'm sewing them. But of course, you can do this by hand and not on your sewing machine if you prefer. Okay, and this method is now done. So those bottom 2 buttons, like I said, I did the traditional way, so you can leave them either buttoned or unbuttoned. And then those top 4 buttons are sewn through both of the neckband layers so that they will not open while you're wearing them. Okay, now on to method 3. So this method is especially nice if you always want to wear your cardigan buttoned up, but also you're worried about it gaping. Now this is usually what I do on my dress views of the Brynn. Just because you're sitting and stuff, it's more likely that there might be a little gaping in between the buttons. So we'll start off just like we did for the last view. So we are going to go from right over left, and we are going to go ahead and either pin or use a glue stick to secure the placement of the right neckband over the left. Now, when we are doing this, we are actually going to cheat that right folded edge of the neckband about a 1/16 of an inch over the seam line of the left neckband. And this is just so that we have a little bit more to grab underneath when we're sewing in the next step, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead now and place our buttons, keeping in mind once again the button placement, that it is a little bit lower and higher on the top and the bottom buttons. And once we have those secured, we are going to go ahead and we are going to sew them through all neckband layers. Once again, I'm doing this on my sewing machine, but you can of course do it by hand if you prefer. Okay, and so it should look something like this at this point. So as you can see, these buttons are sewn through both neckband layers, which already just give it a lot of security. Now go ahead and turn your Brynn inside out. And what we're going to do is we are going to make a line of sewing on top of the seam line where the neckband meets the garment on the right neckband, and this is going to catch the edge of the fold of the left neckband in that line of stitching. So remember how we cheated it over by about a 1/16 of an inch? That is going to allow that little fold to be caught in that line of stitching. And only do those stitching between the top and the bottom buttons. That way it will still open a little bit below that bottom button, so it gives the appearance of it just being held together by buttons, even though there's a little bit more security there. I will say that you want to be pretty careful when you are doing this line of stitching. Make sure that it is right on top of that seam line where the neckband meets the main garment, just so that it does not change the appearance on the right side of the garment. And then you also just want to make sure that you're not hitting the buttons at all in your line of sewing so that you don't break a needle. Okay, now this is the end of the result. So as you can see, it does not open all the way, but it definitely gives the appearance of a normal button band. So that once again, this is especially great if your fabric has a tendency to shift more, or if maybe you're doing the dress view and you know you're going to be sitting in it a lot. This will just give you a little extra security that you're not gonna open up at all at any of those areas between your buttons. Okay, this is the end of the Brynn Sewalong. I hope that this was super helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. You can certainly put them in the comments below, or you can also send us an email.